It is May 12th, 2025, and as India and Pakistan have agreed to a ceasefire, the focus is now on what happened during last week's deadly fight between the two and what weaponry was used. In particular, when it comes to Pakistan's side, the use of Chinese made J 10 aircraft to launch air to air missiles, bringing down multiple French made jets that were used by India. It's sending a very powerful message to the world about China's military might in terms of weaponry and technology and what that could mean for a future proxy war with the United States. I think it's safe to say that the US is not too happy about the current situation, but they are engaging in trade talks with China, talks which led to the Trump administration completely folding on its massive 100+% tariffs that they had imposed on Beijing, putting us in a situation where China wasn't harmed, but American companies sure were. We got into all of the latest and what it means for the ongoing tensions between the world's two largest economies with a special guest earlier. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Carl Zaw, a geopolitical analyst and host of the Silk and Steel podcast. Carl, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, I'm glad I get to talk to you today. I know that there is a lot going on in the world, but I want to start off with the latest when it comes to this ongoing conflict between India and Pakistan because they reached a ceasefire over the weekend after days of deadly fighting. But the discussion surrounding this conflict is not just about these two countries, it's about the weaponry they each used, which for Pakistan was Chinese made J 10 aircraft used to launch air to air missiles, bringing down multiple Indian fighter jets that were made in France. So, I want to know, how do you view this conflict and really what it has told the world about the capabilities of China and its military aircraft?
This is really, some people call this a deep seek moment for the Chinese weapon systems, because for the longest time, even though China has been upgrading its weapon systems, there's always a shadow of doubt that casted. Many people call the Chinese weapons knockoffs. They're not going to work. They're made in China, must be of shoddy quality. And now we've seen it went head to toe against the best, most advanced European fighter jet, the French-made Rafale. And this is undeniable now. Now we have confirmation from both French intelligence official and American official that indeed the Pakistan-operated J-10C has shut down at least two Indian jets, at least one of which is a French-made Rafale, which cost over $100 million per plane. Whereas the Chinese made J10C has a unit cost about $40 to $50 million per plane. So there's a big difference in terms of dollar terms. And on top of that, the India government is paying France for training and spare parts. So just 10 days before the conflict, India announced they had a new deal with France to purchase 26 additional Rafale jets for $7.4 billion. If you work out the math, that's almost like $284 million per plane. And in fact, it's quite embarrassing both for the Indian Air Force and the French company Dassault, which produced the Rafale plane. Because this is the first time Rafale has seen in combat, and it's the first time the Rafale has been shut down. And it was done by, again, a Chinese-made J-10C fighter plane equipped with a Chinese-made PL-15 air-to-air missile.
Yeah, and it's interesting as you're noting there, because that was kind of the reaction that I saw to it, which is, for so long, yes, we've had all of this talk about China modernizing its military, right? But we haven't really known what does that actually look like. And I thought it was also interesting. I know you mentioned this over on X, that it was reported that obviously, yes, India is using these French fighter jets instead of the US made F-18s amid reports that Washington has been pressuring them to make the switch. So I guess maybe good that they didn't have those, at least for the US, because that would have been really embarrassing. But this still sends a very important message about China's position in the global arms race. And yet, China is the one that is not arming extremists, overthrowing governments, right? Kind of forcing its power on various countries around the world. That's the US, and the US tries to act like we have all of this military might. But what does that tell us when we're now in this position when it's like China may be a real competitor, but they're waiting to show that might until it needs to be used?
One thing to note is China do not attach any preconditions when they sell their weapons. So Pakistan also bought American made F-16 jets, but US had Pakistan sign a end user agreement where Pakistan must agree not to use F-16 in a war with India, which kind of severely restricts the utility of F-16. And this is why in the latest conflicts, Pakistan relied on the Chinese j10c instead. So this is a big difference. China will not use its weapon sales try to influence a country's foreign policy, for example, like U.S. often likes to do, and it's just purely about a monetary transaction. China sold weapons also to the Gulf country UAE, and now we have seen China is conducting joint air exercise with the Egyptian Air Force. There was amazing videos showing Chinese jet flying with the Egyptian Air Force over the pyramids in Cairo. And there's a rumor that Egypt will be next in line to acquire j10c. And this latest air battle that took place in India and Pakistan, this only give further impetus for other countries who are thinking about acquiring Chinese jet, because first of all they're proven to be reliable in battle, and it's a lot cheaper than the alternative. They're one third or one fifth the price of a European or American jet, and it's just as good in battle. So that would persuade a lot of people, especially in the global South countries, countries like Egypt, who would possibly look to diversify their military supplier when they realize, they may not be able to rely on Washington, in times of war. And here you have China, who can supply reliable weapon system at much cheaper price.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting aspect to this too, because instead of the US looking at the situation and saying, okay, maybe we should back off from China, right? Maybe we should stop trying to pursue an open proxy war against China. Instead, my fear is that the US and the neocons in Washington are almost going to double down and now wanting to target China even more, because we saw this when China started to increase its military spending, when it started to talk about wanting to modernize its military. The US started freaking out and was like, no, we have to go up against China even harder. So, what are your concerns about the US march to war with China and where it stands right now?
Well, this should ring an alarm bell in Washington, because j10c is not the latest in the Chinese arsenal. In fact, the People's Liberation Army Air Force is about to retire the J10s in their inventory. Now they have already moved on to J20, which is a stealth air fighter. J10c is not a stealth air fighter. It's considered 4.5 generation fighter. And right now, China already are mass producing J20 stealth fighters, whereas the U.S. equivalent is F-35. But we know F-35 is a really versatile plane, because sometimes it double up as a submarine in the bottom of the ocean. And let's face it, F-35 is such a boondoggle. It's not designed to fight a war. It's designed to feed the military industrial complex. It's designed to make all the lobbyists rich from the kickbacks, and make sure the top brass can retire comfortably in the Bahamas. They're not designed to fight wars. And then there's a matter of industrial capacity. China can crank out these stealth fighters at much greater rate than Washington at this point. And this is due to the policy of Wall Street to offsource American manufacturing to East Asia for the last 40 years. The manufacturing has hollowed out so much in the United States. Now it's starting to affect the defense industries. The Pentagon has admitted that China has 200 times the shipbuilding capability than United States. The U.S. have about 3 shipyards that can produce warships, whereas any one of China's shipyards, China's Jiangnan shipyard next to Shanghai, is about 7 times larger than any of the American shipyard. And right now, United States is now going to seeking help from South Korea and Japan in order to help U.S. with a naval buildup. So essentially, the Pentagon already gave up on bringing manufacturing back home to the U.S. They went to there was actually a U.S. law that prohibits United States from purchasing foreign warships, and now the Pentagon is working with the Congress to skirt that legislation. Now they're trying to get U.S. warship fitted, retrofitted, or built in South Korean shipyard because it will be much cheaper. This is where we are today. United States now have to rely on South Korea and Japan to continue its naval buildup versus China. I mean, this is kind of the sad state of the way that the U.S. elite have hollowed out its own manufacturing. Now it's even affecting the military-industrial complex. I think they were going to look at the air battle in India, Pakistan, and realize, oh crap, China has much more up their sleeves in terms of next generation weapons. Also, China just tested their 6th generation fighters, 6th generation stealth fighter, 2 prototypes, whereas United States next 6th generation air fighter, the so-called NGAD, the next generation air dominance fighter, that's still on the drawing board. They're still debating whether it's going to be a manned aircraft, unmanned aircraft, and it's still at the PowerPoint presentation phase, whereas China already had their prototype flown in the sky, and they're looking to mass produce at maybe in the 2030s. So United States is already behind. It's behind so much now. US is falling behind in its military industrial complex. So that's where we are, Rachel.
Yeah, I never thought I would see the day, right? With the US, given the fact that, we talk about how the US has outsourced so much, right? So much of our manufacturing to other countries, and that the military industrial complex was our main product. And yet now we're seeing that that's not even going to be able to stand up to the competition from a country like China. Now, I do want to move over to the talks that are happening, right? We did see talks over the weekend happen in Geneva, which resulted in officials from both sides announcing that they reached a deal to roll back most of the recent tariffs and call a 90-day truce in their trade war for more talks on resolving these trade disputes. Now, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer said that the U.S. agreed to drop its 145% tariff on Chinese goods by 115 percentage points down to 30%, while China agreed to lower its rate on U.S. goods by the same amount down to 10%. So how do you view the significance of these talks and of this deal that was just made?
Well, I have never seen top Chinese officials openly acting out so optimistically in a press conference. The Chinese vice premier, he was in talk with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He was practically beaming in the press conference. I mean, basically, Trump folded like a origami paper crane, and we're now rolling back all the way back to the quote unquote liberation day, right? So we're talking about China gets a 10% tariff, like all the countries in the world, plus a 20%, the so-called fentanyl tariff, and so that's the level before April 2nd, the so-called Liberation Day announcement. So what has Liberation Day accomplished then? For US, well, not much. Well, I would argue for China, it actually accomplished a lot because you show the world that US is not a serious country, and China actually come out looking like the true global leader. China stood up to the United States, and US backed down. And in return, that inspire other countries like Japan also to say no to the United States. This is I think there's the problem, Rachel, is that U.S., especially the Trump administration, they lack strategic clarity when it comes to China. They don't really they don't really know what they're doing, and this was reflected when the Japanese trade delegation was in Washington to ask them, okay, we're here to find out what you want, and they the Trump administration came back with, what's your offer? And the Japanese delegation were totally confused because they travel all the way here to find out what the Americans really want, and then they came away with the impression that the Trump administration don't really know what they want, and so they ended up with no deal. And I think China went into this trade talk also trying to find out, exactly what's U.S. intention, and I think to everybody's surprise, Trump totally just folded and rolled back. But I guess not everything is lost. I'm sure the Trump's buddies made tons of money through insider trading, because we saw some suspicious activity just before the announcement of the Liberation Day. There were a lot of short position were placed on the stock market, and I'm sure there were a lot of bets before the market opened today on how, because the market is going to go gangbusters at this news for sure, and the people who would have no pre-knowledge of what was going to happen, they're making out like a bandits right now. But that's always the way it is in Washington, Rachel. It's always like, I like to say our government is of the oligarchs, by the oligarchs, for the oligarchs. So they will walk away with more money in their bank, but this really hurt U.S. businesses, and particularly small businesses. A lot of the bigger business like Walmart, Amazon, they might be able to eat, the kind of the disruption that happened over last month. But a lot of small businesses are getting wiped out. And even if the tariff are being rolled back today, it's the disruption to the supply chain is still in place, because it takes 30 days to cross the Pacific. And even if they load up the goods in China right now, it's take another 30 days for them to reach ports in New York and Texas. And so what we're looking at is, we're before the talks, we're about we only have 5 to 7 days of inventory at those most of the businesses. So like if they let this drag on, things gonna get really bad in June and July. But so thankfully we're not gonna see shortages on the shelves this time. Trump rolled back just in time, but I would argue he should have done it much earlier, because Trump's base would believe anything he says. I mean, I already saw on Twitter, the same guy who back in April said China will bend the knee by this end of the month. Bookmark this, right? And now he's tweeting, China has caved. Okay, these people, they will believe anything. Like, Trump had nothing to lose, literally reversing his position earlier than he did. But the damage is irreversible to the U.S. reputation around the world, unfortunately. Now the whole world have seen that these jokers in Washington, man, they're not serious people, and it's gonna take a long time to rebuild that trust. But the positive side is we might still be in time to save back to school sales. So that's where we are.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because even just looking at the tariffs that Trump was rolling out, as you were noting, on this so-called Liberation Day, I mean, he's slapping tariffs on countries around the world they're going, hey, we're trying to work with you, right? We're trying to help you with this transition away from any reliance on China, and now you're hitting us with tariffs. how does this figure? And it almost kind of goes into, which is kind of the Donald Trump chaos, right? He runs around, he's like a bull in a china shop, and we're seeing this play out in a number of different ways. And then he pursues talks, right? We're seeing talks with Iran, talks with Russia. He's headed to the Middle East this week, and now he's dealing with talks with China. And yet I'm looking at all of this and knowing that the US establishment below the surface, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, they still want war with China, right? That is their ultimate aim. They want to weaken China just like they tried to weaken Russia, although they never learn from any of their failures. So, lastly, I just wanted to ask you, what are your concerns moving forward? Even though, yes, we are at this point where China has sent a very powerful message about where its military might stand in terms of technology. The US and China are working things out, or at least Trump is figuring things out when it comes to tariffs. But what concerns still remain when you're looking at the future and kind of what is to come?
Well, you made a good point, Rachel, about U.S. military still want confrontation with China. If one are to be super cynical, you would say what happened last month is actually a stress test. Because U.S. Pentagon has been pushing for this decoupling from China for a long time. Their argument is our economic entanglement with China, tie our hands in case of war, and they have said over and over, like the danger is that China might cut us off in case of war, right? It turns out everything is projection because Trump imposed an embargo himself. If China had unilaterally declared embargo against the United States a month ago, this will be treated as an act of war. But since Trump did it himself, now he literally flipped the game around. But if I'm to be cynical, I would say this might be a stress test to see how much pain the U.S. public will take, facing with a cutoff with the trading goods from East Asia in case of war. This is why they let this whole thing drag out for a month and then try to restore the trade at the last minute. So people have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and it'll be very interesting to see how the Trump administration decides to handle things involving China moving forward. A lot for us to continue to keep an eye on. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Carl Zaw, a geopolitical analyst and host of the Silk and Steel podcast. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for inviting me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.